Story 1. Port-au-Prince, Haiti, is the saddest and most depressing place I have ever visited, and I have been to Afghanistan. Story 2. I went to Haiti in 2016 shortly after the hurricane to take part in some of the relief efforts. I still cannot find the words to describe how eye-opening the experience was to see people trying to live their best in unimaginable conditions. Video and photos cannot do it justice. Whenever I feel shortchanged by life, I think back on my trip there and remind myself that things on my end really aren't all that bad. Story 3. Tijuana. I was pulled over and accused of being drunk. I was arrested and sentenced to a year in prison in less than 48 hours. It took the United States Navy a month to find me and get me out. Story 4. Mogadishu is the capital of Somalia. I was in Ethiopia and crossed the mountains with friends and locals. This was in the early 1990s, and now it has become a travel advisory. The advice I copied from US states is accurate. Please have a will drawn up along with other important tips. Be sure to appoint one family member to serve as the point of contact with hostage takers, media, US government agencies, and members of Congress if you are taken hostage or detained. Establish a proof of life protocol with your loved ones so that if you are taken hostage, they can ask specific questions and receive answers from the hostage takers to confirm you are alive and to rule out a hoax. Leave DNA samples with your medical provider in case they are necessary for your family to access. Story 5. Hemet, California. If you've ever wanted to quickly encounter a proud pedophile, an extreme religious zealot, and a drug dealer, that's the place to go. Story 6. Probably Phnom Penh. I could handle the kids who said they did not want money, just milk, being managed by a Fagin-like character, but as I wandered down by the Mekong, I began to wonder why there were so many older German men sitting alone on benches. Then I encountered groups that were not alone, and I was shocked by how young the girls were. Some looked almost prepubescent. Turned my stomach. Story 7. Djibouti City is in a difficult state. 90% of the country is in poverty, and the government is remarkably corrupt. Cod is available at nearly every street corner. It acts as a stimulant to stave off hunger and keep people working. I will never forget driving through the city, seeing the ramshackle huts where people live, and witnessing individuals who look extremely malnourished. It was striking to eventually drive past the presidential palace and question the situation in the country. It is a challenging reality. Regarding the comparison of khat and methamphetamine, I have not tried either substance, so I cannot provide a personal opinion. However, as I researched the topic due to outside discussions, I found information from the National Library of Medicine stating that acute effects of khat have been reported to be similar to crack cocaine or methamphetamine. Story 8. Not a very well thought out take, but I once stepped outside on a bus that made a stop in Shreveport, Louisiana, and thought right away, I wouldn't mind if I never saw this place again. Story 9. My lungs still haven't forgotten my 6 weeks in Beijing over a decade ago. It's great from a historical standpoint, but that pollution is no joke. Story 10. Guayaquil, Ecuador. I have never felt more unsafe in my life. Reports of express kidnappings and scouting are prevalent throughout the city, at any time of day. I was also warned not to use ATMs on the street because you could get stabbed and robbed immediately. Scouting involves drugging people with scopolamine, making them compliant. Victims are then taken to a bank to empty their accounts. The best-case scenario is being dumped on the sidewalk, while the worst-case scenario is being stabbed and left in an alley. During a port visit, we were advised to consider staying on board the ship for the duration of our stay. Honorable mention, Puerto Quetzal, Guatemala. I couldn't understand why tour bus rentals were so expensive until the company explained that the price included a guard who carried a submachine gun and had the legal authority to use lethal force to defend the bus and its passengers. Story 11. St. Louis is both the best and worst city I have ever seen. The Del Mar divide is real. You can go from nice houses and buildings to dilapidated areas in the blink of an eye. Story 12. 2 cities qualify because they have the same name. Jackson. Jackson, Michigan is where many prisons are located for Detroit. I was visiting and touring a factory that my company sold for a manufacturer's representative. It looked like they had just let the convicts out onto the streets. It was dirty. Inside the factory, the conditions were poor as well. The workers seemed intimidating, and everyone appeared angry. Jackson, Mississippi was not as dirty, but the people were unusual. Felt like a casting call for characters from various reality shows and films, all in one place. A festival of oddities. Story 13. I haven't visited many unpleasant places, so my answer may be mild compared to others listed, but Waco, Texas, was not an enjoyable experience. It was extremely hot, with very little to do besides visit the downtown area, which mostly consists of tourists admiring the homes renovated by the HGTV hosts. It was a disappointing city. Story 14. Midland, Texas, and Odessa, Texas, are among the ugliest places I have ever seen. They are scars on the face of the earth. Story 15. Doha has 15 five-star hotels, but there are no tourists and a creeping sense of despair about how everything was created and maintained. Story 16. When reading comments in this forum, I see many Americans mentioning various U.S. cities. Although I believe their experiences may not reflect reality, I can't shake the feeling that it seems like most Americans have not traveled outside the country. It appears that many Americans today may not have the financial means or opportunities to travel abroad anymore. Story 17. Daggett, California, was only reached because a bad accident on the freeway forced everyone to detour on the way to Las Vegas. It is in the middle of the desert and looks like a horror movie set that was abandoned in the 1980s. Story 18. Lagos, Nigeria is often filthy, except for the nicer neighborhoods. The traffic is at a standstill, and there are masses of people living in cardboard boxes stacked on top of each other, creating extreme poverty. The airport is intimidating, with people following and harassing you before you can even retrieve your bags. As a white American woman, I would never walk around alone. Anyone with money needs an escort and lives in walled compounds with security guards. Infrastructure in Nigeria is lacking. The roads are so bad that drivers often use dirt paths due to numerous potholes. There are daily electricity blackouts, so people with means rely on generators. I lived there for a year, teaching in eastern Nigeria with my husband and children. We preferred generators because the public electricity system was so unreliable that light bulbs in our apartment would pop and appliances would be damaged. After dark, it was dangerous to go out. People were regularly hijacked and robbed by bandits with machine guns. One university professor was once trapped in a trunk and had to bang on it and risk his life to escape into the bush in the dark when they opened it. It's a shame because most average people are wonderful and manage to find joy, despite earning only a few dollars a day, lacking electricity, and having to sleep in their cars to get gas, even though Nigeria is the third largest oil-producing country in the world. A very small handful of people control all the wealth and do not reinvest in the country. We were there during the presidential elections of 2006, which were a joke. The same four men have been rotating the presidency for over 40 years. The founder of our university, Atiku Abubakar, is a billionaire in imports and exports. He ran for president in 2006, but his opponent attempted to assassinate him, prompting him to flee to the United States. My family was in a state of panic. My father contacted a private defense contractor and arranged for a helicopter to evacuate us if necessary. Thankfully, we didn't need it, but there were a few close calls. Story 19. Naples, Italy, was the dirtiest and most trash-filled city I have ever visited. There was dog waste and piles of garbage everywhere as I tried to walk around. Story 20. Sunderland. You know when you see Peaky Blinders, and they are filming down a dirty alleyway? That's what the whole of Sunderland looks like. Story 21. Chennai, India. There were small children on the sidewalks, and the streets smelled of urine and feces. Story 22. Cairo. Not a second went by without being swindled, hustled, or ripped off. It was the worst vacation of my life. Story 23. I have had the privilege to visit some of the poorest countries in the world, and without a doubt, the worst city I have ever visited is Blackpool in the United Kingdom. Story 24. It's Cairo. I have never seen such a messy and dirty place, but I have to admit I have not been to India either. Story 25. Downtown Aliquippa, Pennsylvania. I felt like I drove through a time portal, not in an interesting way. It seemed as if time stopped in 1933, perpetually capturing the low point of the Great Depression. Story 26. Amarillo, Texas, has the most depressing stretch of power lines and mediocre chain restaurants. Story 27. I used to travel a lot for work. Off the top of my head, Nassau, Bahamas was pretty rough. Outside of the tourist areas, it was not very nice. Walking down the beach one evening, a man with a large black garbage bag yelled, "Hey, come here, want to buy some marijuana?" He did not seem trustworthy, so I just kept walking. I went to a fast food place around the corner from my hotel with a few friends. The server was behind bars. A group of locals came in and tried to pressure us to buy them food. One night, I tried to walk to a store after dark, and a police officer stopped me and told me to go back to my hotel. Detroit was also quite rough. Some parts of the city were nice, but I was looking for a place to eat before crossing the border. 3 places in a row that I searched for barbecue were either burnt down or abandoned. Story 28. Wuhan. I visited for work before it gained international attention. The airport had no food options except for a cigarette vending machine, and it went downhill from there. A little less than a year later, I was with a friend at a bar when the television broadcast a news story about a mysterious flu that appeared in China. I gestured at the television with my beer and looked at my friend. Guarantee that started in Wuhan. Oh, how little did I know then. Story 29. Youngstown, Ohio. It was my first time in Ohio, and I couldn't believe the town. I did like Cleveland, though. Story 30. Nassau, Bahamas. Everything feels like a scam and a ripoff. I went there for work, and everything is based on extortion and bribery. Story 31. Opelika, Florida, is a danger city just north of Miami. It has an unusual Middle Eastern-style city hall that is at the center of the city, with residential streets forming concentric circles around it, filled with incredibly dilapidated homes. Feels surreal. Outside of that area, the surroundings are very industrial. The towns on the south shore of Lake Okeechobee also feel like they are in the developing world. Pahokee and Belglade are the 2 towns specifically. Overall, the worst city I have visited is Port-au-Prince. Story 32. Manila. I spent 1 hour in traffic trying to go 1 kilometer. Multiple times, I had children banging on the windows begging for money. Tuk-tuk drivers physically tried to pull me into their vehicles right after I stepped out of my taxi. The whole place was chaotic. The rest of the country is stunning, though. Story 33. Portland, Oregon, was a great city in the past, but now it faces significant challenges. Story 34. I live in the Northwest and do not travel that far. However, the 2 worst cities are Portland, Oregon, and Yakima, Washington. Story 35. Juarez, Mexico. I have lived across the border for most of my life, and my church organized mission trips to an orphanage there every Christmas. I went when I was 13 to 16. It was clearly poor and dirty, but grown men were offering us teenagers methamphetamine, marijuana, cocaine, and other drugs. The girls were also approached and solicited for sex. Gunshots were fired just a few feet from us. The nuns informed us that the girls in the orphanage were regularly raped, but nothing could be done because they were afraid of being killed or abducted. Yes, my church was aware of this but believed that the power of God protected us. Yes, my parents knew about this but did not care. Eventually, my church shut down the missions when another church group from Texas came under gunfire. Story 36. I recently went to Silicon Valley for work. Everything is extremely expensive. Everything is very spread out, and there is no convenient public transportation. Pithy Elon Musk quotes are displayed on random buildings. Everyone appears friendly on the surface, but there is an undercurrent of hostility and entitlement. An Uber driver told me that people in nice cars will try to drive into you or brake check you because they know they can cover the damages. A guy during our business meeting took 8 minutes to chronicle his entire work history and resume. It was an odd display. A waiter at a restaurant gave my coworkers and me a disapproving look for lingering at our table to enjoy our food and drinks. It may not be dirty or crime-ridden, but instead, it is cold, sterile, and exclusionary. Couldn't wait to leave. Story 37. Thunder Bay, Ontario. Granted, I was on tour en route from Toronto to Calgary, which is like a 3-year drive, and they booked us into what had to be a strip club run by a mafia of indeterminate ethnicity, but on a night when they had bands instead of strippers. It was bleak. The hotel afterwards was bleak. The morning drive looking for coffee was bleak. I couldn't wait to get out, which didn't take long as it is not exactly a bustling metropolis. This was also in late October. Cold, gray. Did I mention bleak? Story 38. Honestly, Youngstown, Ohio. I worked and lived in Northeast Ohio for a year and had to go there for various appointments, and it was quite disappointing. Story 39. Kensington neighborhood in Philadelphia has many addicts who walk in front of cars. Just a few blocks away from the homeless addicts, there are armed young and old drug dealers. Story 40. Selma, Alabama. I spent a night there on business. It was not a pleasant experience. Flint, Michigan. A client of mine has a plant there, and I have visited it twice. Cape Town, South Africa. I made a wrong turn while trying to get back to the airport at night. It was a challenging situation. Story 41. I'm surprised more people aren't discussing North Philly. Kensington feels like a scene straight out of The Walking Dead. Story 42. Moscow was challenging. I was scammed by several taxi drivers. It was very cold, and I almost faced a risky situation while trying to negotiate the cost of the last taxi I took. Story 43. I live in Louisiana. Whenever I go to New Orleans, I have to constantly look over my shoulder, ensure I'm not hitting potholes while driving, and the odor in many areas can be unpleasant. However, the food and music are great. Story 44. Paterson, New Jersey, was the worst city I have ever been to. I dated a man who lived there with his parents and sister for almost 5 years. The worst part was the downtown area, where all the apartment complexes and fast food restaurants are located. You cannot walk 5 feet from the train without someone approaching you asking for bus money, when in reality they are just trying to get money for their next fix. I saw a woman at a bus stop whose face was covered in scabs and sores from picking at it due to using methamphetamine. Almost every retail business has bars on the windows and bulletproof glass at the counters. Even the local pizza place had bulletproof windows and slots for you to receive your pizza. There was one gas station in this town where a couple of immigrants from Pakistan worked. One of the attendants was deaf and would hand you a pencil and paper to communicate what kind of gas and how much you wanted. This poor man and his brother were murdered by a couple of criminals who shot and robbed the station. It broke my heart to see the station adorned with flowers and signs, as well as not seeing this attendant because he was so kind to me. Last but not least, the block where my ex lived was Fair Street, which turned out to be a notorious crime-ridden area with drug dealers, shootings, and people allowing their elementary school-aged children to play outside until 4 in the morning on weekends. There were no parents present, and one of the residents in that complex where the kids played was a registered sex offender. Speaking of that, my ex was arrested for possession and distribution of child pornography on that street back in 2015, which ultimately led me to end the relationship. He hid that from me the entire time, and it took me 2 years to trust people again. Story 45. Small town answer. Bluefield, Virginia. Worst stop ever. Gas stations closed, no public restrooms, no food, and the roads seemed designed to be deliberately confusing. Story 46. Shawneetown, Illinois. Meth Central. Dilapidated and boarded up businesses. I made a wrong turn and had to go through town. I received a ticket for running a stop sign that the officer even agreed was obscured. I was going maybe 5 miles per hour. I'm pretty sure that $120 ticket was the town's entire revenue for the week. Story 47. New Orleans still felt like it was reeling from Hurricane Katrina when I went there nearly 10 years ago. The French Quarter was pleasant, but most places smelled like an open septic tank. My Airbnb was at the crossroads of railroads, cargo ships, and trucks crossing the levee, so horns were constantly blaring through the night. There was a seemingly nice deli nearby where they still sold Barks root beer in a glass bottle. Buffalo, New York takes the sole prize for making me feel like I was waking up to a second September 11th, with loud explosions happening next door without any warning to anyone. Story 48. Atlantic City, New Jersey. It was like a less desirable version of Hill Valley that Biff created in Back to the Future 2. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.